Hello everyone and welcome to the first episode of Stop Motion Challenge. I'll review figures based on how well they perform as stop motion puppets, concluding with a stop motion animated battle at the end. Now our first two figures are Godzilla and Mecha King Ghidorah. Now we're going to start off with Mecha King Ghidorah. So Mecha King Ghidorah is actually one of my favorite characters from the Godzilla franchise. My brother, he really likes Godzilla, but this is my favorite character. And this toy in particular is extremely detailed. You can even see some of the scales on the tails, and really good paint finish. It's a fantastic toy for display, but how well does it do in a stop motion animation? So now we're going to be moving on to Godzilla. This is one awesome figure as well. This Godzilla toy in particular is the Godzilla 2000 version. This is one of our favorite versions. My brother really likes this version as well. I particularly like the purple spikes in the back, and his head's particularly great. He has a really good face, even though it looks like he's looking up slightly, which isn't that great. But he is a cool figure, and there's one of the problems that always happens. We'll get to that later. Now first we're going to start off with seeing how many points of articulation the toy has. So this toy in particular has 76 points of articulation. Now you can see a point of articulation basically counts as where a toy can move. So you can see here the joint. So that's a point of articulation. This here is a point of articulation. And so technically this whole tail, since you can move it even though very slightly, it is a point of articulation. And these wings, for example, also points of articulation. So this guy, he has several points of articulation. So that's a plus. But as we'll soon see, points of articulation aren't actually everything, because if the joints don't hold up in a stop motion, then it doesn't really matter how many points of articulation a toy has, it's still gonna perform pretty badly. So because the toy happens to have 76 points of articulation, I am going to give it an A in points of articulation. So Godzilla happens to have 46 points of articulation. He has less than Mecha King Ghidorah, although 46 points of articulation is still a lot. I mean, on average, you're going to get on a toy about 20 to 25 points of articulation for a good toy. So having 46 points of articulation is quite awesome. Most of them are in the tail, though. There aren't really many points of articulation in the arms or the legs. So he does have a lot of points of articulation, and for that he gets an A-. So now we're going to analyze the joint durability of all these points of articulation. So, Mecha King Ghidorah in particular has one very annoying problem. And that is that one of these tails, I believe it's this one, when you move it slightly, it will fall off. There we go, there it is. This is the one. So this one, even if you move it just a tiny bit, you see this one, you can see that if you bend it, it's not going to break. But this one, oh man. So this broke off probably, I don't know, 20 times while I was animating. So if I start moving the heads, one of these heads also tends to break off, especially when you're trying to get him into some more extreme poses. So the joint durability of one of these heads in particular, and the tails, really makes it difficult to be animating him. When it comes to joint durability, however, he's gonna have to get an F, just because if you're animating something and the joints won't even hold up for sometimes the slightest of movements, then that's kind of a failure for your puppet. And for that, it gets an F in joint durability. Godzilla in particular, his arm, this one, if I just move it even a little bit, oh, see, already snaps off. You can breathe on this and it's gonna fall off. It's pretty ridiculous. And to be animating with this you can imagine how horrible it must be. The tail does hold up well. unlike Mecha King Ghidorah where his tail also falls off. But this one is just, it's terrible that that's always falling off. All the other joints are fairly durable. They can withstand quite a bit. They don't really move a whole lot, but yeah, it's a decent amount of durability. So, like Mecha King Ghidorah, if your joints are falling off, even with the slightest movement, it's not going to work for stop motion. So it fails on joint durability. So now we're going to deal with balance. Now balance is a key aspect of stop motion animating, and I'm going to show you why. Because, you know, toys like this are great for display, but when you have two characters fighting, you're going to need to actually bend them towards a certain direction. You know, maybe they have to kick someone, or maybe they have to headbutt them or something like that. And so because of that, when I start bending this guy, you'll notice that even if I bend him all the way over here, he still manages to maintain his position. The tails, obviously it's falling on his tails, but that's a good thing, because at least the tails are helping with balance. And even if I position, and I have, if I position this guy in the middle like this, you can get him to actually stand up. And you don't actually need to use clay or scotch or anything, he will stand. You can kind of see how he can maintain his balance there. So his balance is great. And that's also partly due to the bottom feet. Now feet are key with stop motion puppets because if they're big and flat like this, that's great. This is the kind of feet you want in a puppet. You don't want little skinny feet, which some of the other toys that I'll be doing have, because then they just falling down all the time. The other good thing that this guy has going for him in terms of balance is the weight. So that his sheer weight, because he's a heavy guy, he'll stay in place with whatever pose you're making him do. So in terms of balance, I'll be giving him a nice B for balance. All right, so let's take a look at Godzilla's balance. Now, Godzilla also has these feet here, so that's great. So big feet are always good. When it comes to balance, even when you prop him up like this, he can mostly balance himself out. The big problem though is this tail. This tail weighs a lot. So even when I try and put him kind of like this, he's gonna fall. And that's pretty problematic when you're trying to get him to maybe reach down and grab something, right? So if you're gonna position him like this, and you're gonna go for a tail whip, it's not really gonna work out, because the minute you let go, he drops back to the ground. So you're gonna have to find a way to hold him off camera so that you can actually swing the tail around. And that's not very good. You don't want that. You don't want to be holding toys off camera. So because of that, it does get a C grade for balance. Now the next category is called range of movement. Now this category exists because a figure can have several points of articulation, amazing joint durability, and even a fantastic center of balance, but how far can you take their movements? How far back can the head go? How far can the tail go? Stuff like that. Because when you're animating, you want to take these characters into some of the most extreme positions, especially when they're fighting. Because if they're just talking to each other or sitting down or whatever, well, they're not going to need to move almost at all. But if they're fighting, oh, they really have to move, especially if they have to kick or something. And as you can see, this guy really doesn't have much of a range. So if I bend him, see, that's the whole range that joint has. So he can't even bend down, really. Yeah, if I move the legs, he might bend down, but even these won't move that much. A lot of the joints are very restricted, as you can see. I can't really bend these that far. And he already doesn't have any arms, so it's already difficult enough to make him hit anything. He mostly attacks with his heads anyway, but even the heads won't really bend that far down or that far up, as you can see. And the wings, however, they do have a nice range. At least they go up and down. So because his range of movement is fairly limited, we are going to be giving it a D-. So Godzilla's range of movement, it's quite limited because one, his arms don't really reach that far, and so that presents quite a few problems. His legs, they won't really move that far either. So it's not like he can bend over or something like that. The range of movement of the tail is also quite restricted. Even if I bend it this way, that's about all it's going to go. If I take it further than that, I'm going to break the toy. And, you know, tail doesn't constrict like that. It's going to go more than that. So these joints really don't have a lot of range to them. The same thing happens with the tails of King Ghidorah. So both these toys, and probably most of the toys from this series, suffer from that problem. Now, since his head can barely really move, his arms really can't reach anywhere, and his tail is fairly constricted, I'll have to give it, in terms of its range of movement, it's gonna get an F, unfortunately. So in conclusion, I'm going to give an overall grade for both toys. Now this grade isn't really an average of their scores, it's more just an overall grade based on all the things I just criticized and pointed out on how well the toys would perform in a stop motion animation. So based on that, Mecha King Ghidorah is going to get a D+, and Godzilla is going to get a D-. So really these toys aren't very good for stop motion. I would not recommend them for any stop motion animation. But nonetheless, I still animated them, and you get to see the result. And you get to see who wins, Godzilla or Mecha King Ghidorah. Now, the result of the victory isn't always based on who gets the higher score, because I animate them before I do this review, so I don't even know which figure is really going to be the better figure in terms of stop motion. So really, anybody can win these battles, either of the opponents. So I hope you enjoy it.